Caught my wife cheating, but then she tried to run over my new GF with her car. Now she's in prison and I got everything in the divorce. I'm much happier than ever with my GF who survived. Hey everyone. I, 36M, was married to my ex-wife, 35F, her name is Cassandra, for 6 years. We had an alright marriage, I mean, for the most part. I can't say it was perfect or anything, but it wasn't horrible. We had met on Facebook and something sparked up between us there. Things were pretty great during the dating phase and I was very cautious looking out for red flags because I grew up with a mother who was very abusive towards my father and I didn't want to find myself heading towards anything close to similar. I didn't see any warning signs though. So, we eventually got married and things were fine. Unfortunately, about 2 years into the marriage, we'd start having big fights about once every month. Quite frankly, it started to get exhausting, but I was doing my best to make things work because why not? We had a good start to our relationship, so I really felt that it was possible for us to figure out what was wrong and sort it out. I suggested couples therapy more than once, but after one session she refused to go again. I personally think she wasn't happy with the fact that the therapist didn't exactly seem to be on her side. It became evident that she had a temper though, and it hadn't been there before. It was part of what we were going to explore, but we never had more than one session. My own assumption was it was related to the loss of her father, but I couldn't be certain about that. She would never break things or hurt anyone though. It was just a lot of loudness. Anyway, we eventually hit a groove of just coexisting with each other. There were still quite a few good times, but it definitely wasn't the kind of strong, exciting relationship that we used to have. There was no doubt that I was still in love with her, though I recognized that if things didn't change in the next few years after that, we'd likely be heading towards divorce. I wanted to give it a try though, because I never saw marriage as something that you should just walk into and walk out of, obviously, excluding abuse, infidelity, and other major deal breakers. I think that's enough background though. I'm not the highest ranking employee in existence where I work. I'd say I'm painfully mid-level. However, I often have to travel to other states for work, and what I'm about to talk about was one of those times. I went for an expo, and while it was a 4-day thing, the company representatives there were called back after 3 days because there was a work emergency that needed more hands on deck. As the good little boy I was at my job, I rushed back. The only thing was that I didn't tell my wife I was coming back. Most of the reason was because I wanted to surprise her. Things had gotten to a point where I felt like I had to force the spark back into things because we were just coasting and not even trying to be spontaneous. The day that I got back, I bought the flowers that I knew she liked and I went home. Obviously, I had my key, so I let myself in. I knew she was supposed to be at home that day, so when I didn't see her in the living room or in the kitchen, I went straight to the bedroom and opened the door. Right there, I saw a man on top of Cassandra, doing what you know he was. I could hear her making sounds, and unfortunately for me, the entire image is something that has refused to wash away from my mind. The change in lighting as I opened the door made them aware I was there, and they both jerked up in shock. I stood in the doorway as both of these people rushed to wear their clothes. The man put on his underwear, grabbed the rest of his clothes, and tried to push through me in the doorway to the room. I don't know if he knew she was married, I don't know if he was a regular partner of hers, but in that moment, I found myself with one hand on his throat. I wasn't trying to strangle him, but I was gripping tight. I slapped him twice. Even up until now, I can't understand why that was the way I chose to hit him, but that's what came out of me. He looked shocked and then he looked like he wanted to fight back, but I let go of his neck and he left. By that point, I turned back to Cassandra, who was struggling to put her bra back on. I was infuriated and I just stood there, flowers at my feet, just looking at her as she said nothing and dressed back up. She was avoiding looking at me and I genuinely didn't even know what to do in that moment. As she struggled to straighten her hair, she said the stupidest thing to me. "Why are you even back?" In that moment right there, I felt like doing what I had just done to her affair partner. I wanted to hit her so badly. For some reason, I just couldn't move though, so I stood there like a fool. She didn't meet my eyes and she said, "You weren't supposed to be back," under her breath. I still didn't say anything and she seemed to lose it at that point. "You weren't supposed to be back. It's your fault for not telling me that you were coming back or you never would have seen this. I asked you for an open relationship and you said no. I have needs. I tried to do things without hurting you, but you just had to come back unannounced? Why?" At that point, I walked across the room, grabbed her by the collar of the t-shirt she had just put on, and raised a fist to hit her. She looked frightened and I'm not sure if I would have stopped if she didn't look that way, but I stopped regardless. I am not proud of that moment, even with the context. It's not something I look back at with pride, though part of me rather darkly wishes I had struck her, just for the satisfaction of it. As I let go of her and walked out, I could hear her yapping behind me. "You were going to hit me? Really? This is why I don't freaking love you anymore. You call yourself a man but you're not. You make me sick." And so much more. At that moment, I didn't understand why you'd say those kinds of things to someone who almost just hit you, but later on, it seemed like she was trying to aggravate me and actually get me to hit her. That way, she could send me to jail or something. I just walked out of the house though. I couldn't deal with it and what I might have actually done to her because the situation made me feel like I was inches from snapping. Their smell was in the bedroom and in the house. I found a friend's place to crash at and he was extremely sympathetic to everything that I had gone through. He recommended that I divorce her as soon as I could, and while I wasn't eager to do that because lawyers are expensive and I earned a lot more than she did, I was wary of alimony in her favor. He said that I could potentially get a smaller alimony payment if I had proof of her infidelity. I knew divorce was the answer, so don't think my hesitation was because I was thinking of working things out with her. I'm not that idiotic. I think that Cassandra sort of snapped in that moment, because she started sending me text messages telling me how I had a small penis, how his was bigger, how he was better, and all that type of stuff. I think she was very stupidly enraged that I had caught her and she didn't have a rational emotional response to it. She blamed me for ruining the good thing that she had with her affair partner, and this was how she decided to resolve her emotions for some reason. My friend was there and told me to screenshot the messages as she sent them, which I did. And that right there was such a good call from him. About a minute after her rant, I watched all the messages unsend. I don't know whether she had a brief moment of lucidity, but she clearly had second thoughts. After that, she just sent messages cursing me out, and those ones had no mention of her infidelity. My pal made several cocktails for me through the night until I fell asleep. About 2 weeks later, I finally found a divorce lawyer that was in my pay grade and who I felt very confident with. I presented what I had and he said that we'd be able to do something strong with it. I felt good about it, though he didn't seem too confident that I'd be let off without needing to pay anything. He assured me that he was going to try his best though. She was served with papers and took about a full month to respond to them. I think that was an intentional choice because it was clear as day at that point that neither of us wanted to be in this marriage with one another. The divorce proceedings started and Cassandra was being an absolute at SS through them. She was trying to make things harder than they needed to be at every one opportunity that she had. At that point, we had been separated for several months, so it didn't make any sense. She was just trying to frustrate me and it was working. It was during this time that I was already trying to get over her. I'll admit that I started with a bunch of one-night stands, but at a point, I knew they weren't for me. Part of the reason that I never agreed to an open relationship with her, I've never been anything else but a one-woman type of man. I used to read a lot before life and work kind of took that pastime away from me, but I was trying to find peace in things that didn't come in a bottle, so I found myself at a bookstore at some point during the whole divorce debacle. I was looking for some fiction to read, but I had been out of it for so long that I didn't know where to start. There was a lady there, in the same section as me, so I asked her what she'd recommend if I was looking to read science fiction. She asked me what I liked, I told her, and next thing you know, we were there talking at length about books and our favorite series and all of that. I think we stood there for about 30 minutes before I picked out a book based on her recommendation and got her number. I'm smiling thinking about it because my interaction with her was like a salve to everything I had been going through. We started going out soon after that and I was very open with her that I was going through a divorce, but that didn't really seem to faze her in any way. She said that she was glad I was upfront about it and that it didn't matter much to her. She was distracting me from the pain in my life at that point, but I was glad that I didn't seek her out as a distraction. We met naturally and she turned out to be such an amazing person. The divorce was dragging on and I genuinely wanted to be done with it, but Cassandra clearly didn't. At a point, I and the lady I met at the bookstore, let's say her name is Emily, had been dating for 5 months and yet I was still dealing with a divorce. It was at this point that things went crazy though. Emily and I had a nice day in town and we were walking towards her car in the parking lot of a shopping mall. At this point, everything happened so fast. I heard a car's engine rev suddenly and a vehicle came right towards us, though more towards Emily. I tried to pull her out of the way by yanking her arm, but she was struck in her outstretched leg when I pulled her. You can't imagine the way it felt when I heard her scream in pain and I saw that her leg was broken above the ankle. I was about to call 911 on my phone, but the car had hit another one really hard and was reversing. It faced Emily and I where we were on the floor and I actually had to drag her between the cars before the vehicle drove forward and hit some other cars. By this point, people's attention was drawn to the scene and they were coming closer. It was at that point that someone got out of the driver's side of the car and I saw it was Cassandra. In that moment, it probably made the most sense apart from it being a psychopath, but at the same time, I was so shocked, because there was no way to say that she hadn't just literally tried to kill us, or at least kill Emily. She moved towards us threateningly, but a bystander restrained her. To be 100% honest, I felt like she had lost her mind. I couldn't imagine that level of hatred and madness from her. The extent of trying to run Emily over? I couldn't explain it away despite how much I hated her. The police came soon after, along with an ambulance, and they took Emily to the hospital. Cassandra was arrested, and as she was being arrested, she screamed in my general direction, "It hasn't been a year and you're already walking around with a whore." It was scary, but it was also incredibly confusing because it seemed like she actually felt she had gotten the short end of the stick when I caught her cheating and divorced her for it. She was acting like a victim, as if I hadn't literally walked in on her sleeping with a man. It was one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. Emily could have died that day. She made a full recovery, spoiler alert, and I am incredibly thankful for that. When I told her that it was my soon-to-be ex-wife, I was sure that things were over. Who would want to live the rest of their life with some crazy woman trying to kill them? But all she said was that as long as she was in prison, there wouldn't be anything to be scared of. And of course, prosecutors decided to pursue the case, especially because the parking lot had several cameras that recorded the entire thing. Apparently, she had driven past us once, and I think it was there that she identified us. She then circled back and attempted to hit Emily. She clearly made the decision and didn't question it at any point. At that point, our divorce proceedings essentially came to a halt because of her entire criminal case. Being a major fixture in a serious court case isn't fun, in case you thought jury duty was as bad as it could get. It went on for quite some time, to be honest, and it messed around with my work, which I really didn't like. She wasn't worth all this stress. It was a walk in the park for the prosecutors though. There were eyewitness accounts, CCTV footage, and I and Emily both testified as to what happened. There were quite a few charges, but she was found guilty of every single one, of which the worst was attempted murder. There was no question that she was trying to use the car to kill someone, especially with the second attempt to drive into us. In the end, 12 years in prison. Honestly, I was shocked that it wasn't longer, but the claim was that she showed remorse for her actions. I still feel it was an act, and that she had no criminal history whatsoever. She also had the chance to get out early if she was a good girl in prison. I wanted more time, but 12 years in prison was not a little time for someone in their mid-30s. And she still had to attend her divorce proceedings remotely, though on some occasions, her lawyer represented her entirely. At that point, things actually started to move the way they should have from the start. And with the last piece of the puzzle that she had beautifully served to us by attempting to kill my girlfriend, she got nothing. As in absolutely nothing. The judge refused to even remotely reward such behavior with anything that wasn't hers from the start. The smile it put on my face was huge because at that moment, it was as if everything had just come together despite all the pain she had caused. Cassandra has been out of my life and it feels like she's gone for good, even though I know she'll come out one day. But it makes life so much easier to live, to be 100% honest. I moved out of the old apartment because it reminded me of her cheating, but Emily and I got a place and we've been incredibly happy together. Emily herself jokes that she was happy to be the sacrifice to help put my ex away. I don't know what I could have done differently. Maybe left her when I realized she had a temper, but apart from that, I don't know. All I can say is to avoid crazy women, even when they weren't crazy from the start. I'm glad I'm better off in the end, and that's what counts. I'd be looking forward to reading your comments and seeing your jokes. That's part of what makes me love this community. Now on to the next story. Story 2. Found out my wife cheated on me and was pregnant with a child after I came home from the military. Now I'm happily remarried, but my ex is pregnant with her 4th kid by a new boyfriend. I, 26 male, have been in a relationship with my wife, 26 female, since high school. We were married for 5 years before I was scheduled to leave for Army training camp. It would last 10 weeks, which was the longest we'd ever been apart since meeting. She was sure it would be fine, but when the day of departure came, she started to lose it. She really didn't want me to go. She'd known it was a goal of mine to join the Army, but she still married me. We each knew and felt that we were meant to stay together, no matter what. At first, she didn't try calling me while I was away. After hours away from my phone, I was feeling homesick and thought I'd probably at least have several texts from her. There was nothing. She knew I would have my phone here and there, so I was surprised. Whenever I got her on the phone, she said she didn't know I could have my cell phone. I knew she was lying. I remembered telling her directly that I would have my phone. Throughout the rest of the time I was gone, there were 3 more nights where I didn't hear from her. The 3rd time it happened, she called me the next morning, and after she heard my voice, she started crying. She apologized and told me she was just emotional from missing me so much. I asked her how she missed me so much if she didn't try to call me. She was hurt, and said she just got busy with her friends, because apparently, one of them was moving away soon. When I came back, it was a glorious reunion. I moved in with her on the base while I worked for the Army. It felt like the hardest part was over. That's when I started noticing her texting a lot. I was annoyed, because she'd ignored me some nights while I was away, but now her phone was always in her hand. I knew something was up, even before I noticed how worried she was. I tried to check her phone while she slept one night, but I couldn't see anything without her passcode. The next morning, I was working up the nerve to ask her for her passcode when she told me she scheduled a doctor's appointment. She tried to seem optimistic. I asked her what for, and she told me she was late. Suddenly I realized she thought she might be pregnant. I was excited and hugged her. She half-heartedly hugged me back, saying that she wasn't feeling the best. I was suddenly worried that she cheated on me, and this wouldn't be my child. I looked into her eyes and seriously asked her if she had anything to tell me. She looked straight into my eyes and told me no, she didn't have anything to say. She continued looking into my eyes when she told me she loved me, then she looked away when she said she was just nervous to have a child so suddenly. I started waiting on her hand and foot for 2 weeks, until the day of her appointment. I went with her, as the supportive father of this potential child. She had an ultrasound to confirm what my wife already knew. She was 7 weeks pregnant, but that didn't make sense to me. I calculated the conception date in my head, and it would have been during my absence. I glared at her, straight into her eyes. I could see how fearful and worried she was, right before she looked away and rushed into the bathroom, sick. I got up and left, to the complete disbelief of the technician. I sat in the car, fuming, until my panicked wife caught up to me. We had it out in the car. I told her the conception date made no sense, and I believed she'd cheated on me one of the nights she didn't contact me. She broke down crying, admitting that what I believed was true. She wanted to continue talking, to try to explain, but I just told her to get out of my car. I repeated myself without giving her the chance to speak. Eventually she got out, sobbing. I sped off. She wasn't the woman I thought I knew. Since high school, our entire intimate relationship was worth less to her than some man she slept with while I was gone. She got a ride from her mom back to our house. She banged on the door like it was my fault her daughter was left in the hospital parking lot. I spoke to her through the Ring doorbell, telling her I would have nothing to do with her or her cheating daughter. She was only offended and asked how I knew I wasn't the father of her child. I was losing my patience, but I told her the approximate conception date, which was right in the middle of my training camp dates. She looked at her daughter like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Under her mother's gaze, my wife broke down crying on my porch. She sat down, giving up. My Mill just said things like she thought she was joking and couldn't believe she would do this. She actually clarified with her, getting her to admit out loud that she slept with another man while her husband was away. My Mill was in such disbelief that she just started walking back to her car. My wife got up to follow her, desperate for a ride somewhere, anywhere. She didn't know what to do. She kept asking her mom to open the door, and what she should do. After a few minutes, she let her in and they drove away. Before the divorce was final, we got DNA test results that proved I was not the father. I found it pointless to ask her any more questions about why she did what she did. I wanted nothing to do with her, I only wanted to move on and live my life. I started hoping to find a noble woman, someone I could be proud to call my wife, and I found her years later, after I served in the army. I'm proud to say that my wife is not vain, despite the fact that she's the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. We own a farm together, away from all the nonsense that makes up a majority of the US. She's a traditional woman that doesn't need attention or likes from people outside of our marriage. While we are expecting our first child, my ex-wife is expecting her fourth child, with her newest boyfriend of 5 months. He agreed to let her and her 3 kids move in with him, since he's getting older and wants a family. I don't think they'll last.